Hi everyone, let me now quickly show you our brand new test management system called Test Manager in action. To do that, let me switch over to Test Manager. Here you go, that's the front end, the web application of Test Manager. And as you can see here, I already prepared a project for you. It's called the UiPath banking application. But it speaks for itself that in Test Manager, you are not just able to maintain one project. No, you are able to create and to maintain as many projects as you like. But for the sake of this demonstration, let me focus here on this project here called the UiPath banking application. So the first thing I would like you to show is how we manage requirements here in Test Manager. To do that, click just here on the section requirements, and then you will find a list of all the requirements that are currently part of that project. And here you have two options to manage your requirements. Number one is you could say, well, I want to use Test Manager as my preferred test management system. So in order to create then requirements here in Test Manager, all you need to do, click on Create Requirement, then just give it a name, give it a description, and you can also add labels to your requirements to group those requirements and to find these requirements then faster later on. So that's the first option you have to create requirements here in Test Manager. The second option is you can connect to various other tools. For example, you can connect to application lifecycle management tools, such as, for example, Jira, SAP Solution Manager, or ServiceNow. Or you can integrate also Test Manager into your preferred test management system, such as, for example, Micro Focus or HPALM or ALM Octane or Tricentis Q-Tests, among many, many others. Now, why is that the case? Well, because Test Manager provides a REST API. And on top of that REST API, we provide a connector interface. And that connector interface, as the name already suggests, allows you to connect to different ALM or test management systems. So let me now show you one of these connectors in action. And that is the one we will provide with version 20.4. It's all about the integration into Jira. So let me now show you how we bring requirements, for example, user stories, epics, and themes from Jira into Test Manager. To do that, let me go to my Jira project. Here you go. So that's the Jira project. It's also called the UiPath Banking app. And in the backlog section, you can see that I already created here a sprint, and that sprint contains a couple of user stories. In my backlog, we find more issue types, such as, for example, bugs or tasks. Now, the way we communicate between Test Manager and Jira is by providing a plugin for Jira. And this plugin is available on the Atlassian Marketplace completely for free for you. So whenever I now create, for example, here user story in Jira, then this user story will automatically be transferred to Test Manager. That's the way how I configured my project in Jira here. So let's add here a user story and let's call it calculate overdraft rate, whatever that now means. And when I hit on enter, this user story is being created, as you can see, and this user story is then automatically transferred to Test Manager. So let's check that. Let's go back to Test Manager and let's refresh here the page. And once we did that, we will see in a second that our new user story here popped up in Test Manager. So we can also search for it like calculate overdraft rate, and here you go. And then you will see that user story in that list of requirements shown here. So now let's take a closer look at one of these user stories. Let's go for this one here at the bottom called the create loan quote. So all we need to do in order to see the details of that requirement, of that user story in that case, is we need to click on this link. And then we'll see that we already assigned a lot of test cases to this requirement. And for each and every test case in that list, you can also see we immediately show you the latest execution result. And this immediately gives you at least an idea about the state of the requirement at the current moment. So as you can see, some of these test cases passed and some of them failed. So now let's have a look at one of these test cases to see its details. Let's go for this one here called create high volume loan. Now again, when we click on the link, we'll see in the overview section of this test case called Create High Volume Loan, the latest execution results of this test case. Now, in the section Manual Steps, you are then able to create manual steps for your test case. And in order to create those manual steps, you have several options. You could, for example, use our seamless integration into Task Capture to even create your test documentation. So let me briefly show you how we do that. Well, all you need to do in order to create such a test documentation, click here on Document with Task Capture. So let's do that. Let's say, yes, we want to open Task Capture. And now we want to close here the browser. What then happens is we launch Task Capture, formerly known as Snapshot. And Task Capture will then help us to create our test documentation fully automatically. So it's a very powerful tool that captures all your mouse and keyboard interactions fully automatically when you interact with any applications here on a Windows operating system. Now here you go. So here I can then say, well, I want to now capture my testing process. I just click on it, and then the recorder, as shown here, kicks off. And then we are basically ready to perform our actions with whatever application we want to now test. So let me go to my taskbar here and let me open here a new window in Chrome. So let's click here on Google Chrome and let me navigate then to our UiPath web application. And that is an application we've built for the sake of our demonstrations here to UiPath. Now what I want to now do is I want to create a loan quote in that web application. So what I do, I click on products, I click on loans, I click the button apply for loan. Then I can enter here some email address. Let's go for this one, emeraldco@gmail.com. I enter here some loan amount. Let's go for 35,000. We can say we want to pick a loan term. Let's take for 5 years. A yearly income. Let's go for 65,000. And we also need to provide an age. Let's go for 21, for example. And then we can submit that loan application. And then we can verify, for example, here the loan rate in the application. Now, then my last step is to go back to the start page here in my web application and to close it. And in the meantime, all of my actions have been recorded fully automatically. So the recording of all my mouse and keyboard interactions is really unintrusive. That means you don't feel it. So now let's see what Task Capture in that case created. So let's stop the recording. Once we stop the recording, we'll get back to Task Capture. And here already we see, when we zoom in a little bit, a diagram of all the applications we've interacted with. Now, when I click on one of them, you can see on the right-hand side all the steps I've performed in that application. And as you can see here, we don't not just provide a description of the type of action you performed. No, we also provide a screenshot, and these screenshots are also annotated. So we can also dive a level deeper and say, well, let me show you that screenshot in action, for example. Now, once we do that, we see the navigation here on the left-hand side that shows us all the actions we performed. And on the right-hand side, we see the corresponding screenshot. And the cool thing about this is this screenshot is also annotated. So we show you exactly where you've performed a certain interaction with your system. So in that case, we just clicked on products. What we then did, go to loans, for example, and it speaks for itself that all these annotations are just proposals we make. So you can change these annotations, for example, like this. You can also add other annotations, any kind of shapes like rectangles, for example, or circles. You can add arrows, you can add sequences, you can highlight text or add text. You can even blur information, for example, in the documentation, or you can, for example, crop your screenshots. So the next step is now to publish that back to Test Manager. Now, all we need to do is we need to go to Export and Publish. Then we can select here the UiPath Task Manager. So let's click on it. What we then do is we render the images, we generate the file. It usually takes a couple of seconds until this is complete. So let's wait until the document is ready for us to be published. So here you go. That was pretty fast from my naive perspective. Now, once that is being done, we immediately see that we are able to open the corresponding test case here in the browser in Test Manager. So let's do that. Let's click on Open in Browser. Then we will be redirected here to Test Manager to the corresponding test case. That is exactly the one we started with, called Create High Volume Loan. And then we will see here two links. in that test case, view diagram and open recording. And when you click, for example, on open recording, you can then access the test documentation as a Word file. So let's click on this Word file, and this then opens the test documentation we just created by making use of Task Capture. So let me click here on the button Enable Editing. Once we did that, we can immediately see the comprehensive test documentation we just created for the test case called Create High Volume Loan. And when I'm scrolling down slowly here, you can see that it contains all the information you need to have in order to be able to reproduce all the actions. For example, your business analysts, your subject matter experts have done in order to document their test scenarios. So it's a pretty powerful tool. Now let me quickly close this Word document again. Now, based on this test documentation, you can then say, well, I want to now create so-called manual steps in Test Manager for this particular test case. Why? To perform those manual checks that are represented by that manual test case in a structured way over and over again. So here you can, for example, create those manual steps. You just need to add a description, an expected behavior, and you can also add clipboard data. And in that way, you can describe step by step how you can arrive at certain checks you want to make in your applications. So you can easily, for example, duplicate those steps. You can delete those steps. You can insert steps before or after, or you can move them around. And then even on that page, you can say, I want to now execute this manual test case in debug mode. So let's do that. When we click on debug, then our tiny little neat so-called manual execution agent pops up. So in that case, well, I would definitely then open my web application as already suggested by step number 1. And then you can set those steps as passed or failed. You can even say, well, you want to set multiple steps as passed or fail. Let's say we want to fail the last one and click on done. And that is how fast you can execute a manual test case here in Test Manager. But as you know, we are UiPath, right? And what we want to do is we want you to get rid of performing these dreary, uninteresting manual steps over and over again. So what we want to do is we want to help you to automate these manual steps. And here we provide a very deep integration into Studio Pro, Orchestrator, and the robots. So what you now can do is you can say, well, you want to attach an automation to this manual test case here in Test Manager. Now, how do you do that? Well, in order to show you that in action, all we need to do is we need to go to a Studio Pro project. Here you go, that's Studio Pro, our most advanced IDE for automation here at UiPath. Now, in order to link now an automated test case you create here in Studio Pro to a manual test case you have in Test Manager, all you need to do is you need to go to the project. As you can see, this project is also called the UiPath Banking app. You just go to the ribbon, click on Test Manager, and go to the Test Manager settings. So the first thing you need to do is you need to provide the URL to your Test Manager instance. That is what I already did here. And then you can move on and say, well, you want to now automate your test cases. So this is what I already did here for you. So these are all the test cases I created and automated here in Studio Pro. And then you can say for one of these automated test cases, now I want to link that automated test case to a manual test case in Test Manager. So let's take this one here called High Volume Loan. And I already linked it to a manual test case in Test Manager. And then here you can directly jump to the corresponding test in Test Manager. So when I click here, for example, Open Test, then the corresponding test opens here in Test Manager. And as you have seen before in the section automation, you can see the automation I've linked to this manual test case. So the next step, of course, is to execute these automated test cases on Orchestrator. So let me show you how to do that. Well, again, let me go back to Studio Pro. Now, in order to make them ready for execution on Orchestrator, all we need to do is we can select one or more of these automated test cases. We can set them as publishable here. Then you can see the icons turn from a gray icon to a blue icon. And this just means whenever I hit the publish button then here in Studio Pro, all these test cases are being then uploaded to Orchestrator. So the way we publish now test cases to Orchestrator is the same way we publish any project to Orchestrator. You just provide here name of the package, give it a version, and click on publish. Now that is what I already did. So let me show you how that looks like on Orchestrator. To do that, let me go to my Orchestrator demo instance. So here you go. Let me log in. I'm the user Emerald. Yes, I still don't know why I'm the user, but I am the user. So now let me show you what you can do with those automated test cases on Orchestrator. So one thing you can do is you can create so-called test sets on Orchestrator from the test cases you've created and automated in Studio Pro. And that is exactly what I already did for the test cases I've shown you in Studio Pro right now. The corresponding test set is here called the UiPath Web Regression Test Set. And it exactly contains those 10 test cases I've shown in Studio Pro before. So then we can say, well, we want to kick off the execution of that test set here in Orchestrator. You can do it manually. You can also schedule the execution of these test sets, or you can say we want to kick off the execution of these test sets as part of your build process. So we have many different options how to create test results here on Orchestrator. But whenever we execute a test set here on Orchestrator, we create a test execution. And the test execution is nothing more than an object that contains all the test results of all the test cases that are part of a test set. So as you can see here, I already executed that test set called the UiPath Web Regression Test Set. And it obviously failed. So let's have a look at the details. All you need to do is click on the details, and then you will see the result of every single test case as part of that test set execution. And in that case, you can see, well, there's one test case and that test case failed. It's called long-term loan. So whenever we create and automate test cases in Studio Pro and link those test cases to a manual test case in Test Manager and then execute these automated test cases on Orchestrator, all these results, as you can see here, are being transferred back to Test Manager. So let me briefly show you where you can find them. To do that, let me go back to Test Manager. And here, for example, in the test results section, we then find all the test results we have produced so far. And here is the test set execution I've just shown you before. It's called the UiPath Web Regression Test Set. And when we click on it, we immediately see in the overview section of all the test cases that failed as part of that test set execution. And in the results section, we see then all the test cases that were part of the test set execution, including, of course, the individual results, such as pass and fails. So let's go to one of these test logs here. Let's go to this one here. And as you can see, this test case failed. So when we click on it, then we'll see in a second the complete log that was generated here on Orchestrator. And the cool thing here is you can take then all this information and create a defect, for example, in Jira from this test case log, including all the information we created here on Orchestrator. Now to do that, all you need to do is say, I want to create now a defect. And because of the fact that my project is being linked to a project in Jira, we create the defect or an issue type of bug in Jira. And here in the toast message, you can see we just did that. Now, whenever you created a defect, this defect will be shown here. And you can immediately jump to this defect by just clicking on this link. So let's do that. Just clicked on this link. Here you go. So this is the bug we just created. And the name of this bug is always the test case name and its corresponding result. And here in the section description, you see all the details of that bug. That means the name of the corresponding test case, the start and end time, the duration of the test case, and the complete log you have seen before in Test Manager. And when you scroll down a little bit more, you can also see the links to the requirements. That means you have full traceability now between your requirements, for example, your user stories, your epics, and your themes, your defects, in that case, your bugs, as well as your test assets. So full traceability. And the cool thing about this is you can even jump back to the corresponding test case log in Test Manager from Jira. So just click here on Test Manager, then again Test Manager opens, and it will redirect you to this test case as well as to the corresponding test case log. Now all this is being summed up in the so-called dashboard section here in Test Manager. And here we summarize manual test case execution as well as automated test case execution. And here we provide a couple of metrics to you. And by making use of those metrics, of those dashboards, you as a test automation engineer are then able to support your product management teams or your software development teams to help them to make release decisions purely based on the results of your test case execution. Now, and that's it. That's all I wanted to share with you. That's the short story of Test Manager.